Welcome to another episode of the Refined Peasants podcast. I'm Wyatt.
I'm Garrett.
I'm Nick.
Alright, let's get after it. Alright, so today we're going to cover the verdict of the Chauvin trial after the fact. So he was convicted Tuesday?
Yeah, I believe it was Tuesday. Guilty on all three counts. So that's second degree unintentional murder, third degree murder, and second degree manslaughter.
Yep. And there's a minimum sentence, or a maximum sentence for him, right? Because he's got no previous record. So max is 30 years in prison.
I know there's a max sentence for each charge. I don't know what that would be collectively. So sentencing hasn't happened yet, if you don't know. He's been convicted. I think prosecution had his bond revoked, so he is being housed in jail.
Probably a good thing for his life.
To be perfectly honest. But I don't know as far as like max sentencing what we can expect to see. Chauvin's defense, I don't think I've seen them file for appeal yet. They're going to. I mean, this is... Anytime you get a conviction in something like this, you're going to appeal. Now, whether that appeal gets heard or not, we'll have to wait and see.
Right. So I do know, because he has no record, it's 12 and a half years for second degree unintentional murder, 12 and a half years for the third degree murder, and then 4 years for the manslaughter. For no record. So the max he can get, the max sentence is 29 years.
Okay. So yeah, like you said, right at 30 years, which I don't know how old he is, but he wouldn't be getting out to he's probably 70-something-year-old man,
right,
80, like...
Old man.
Now, and this is all because Minnesota doesn't currently have the death penalty.
I don't think he'd have gotten it anywhere.
You don't think so?
Nah, probably not.
Well, and like I said, sentencing hasn't happened yet. We'll have to wait and see what all goes on. There's still more to this trial. As much as people are saying it's concluded, like I said, we've still got the appeals. We've still got sentencing. There's still more to see what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But the lion's share of it is, I mean, for the most part, said and done. Depending on how appeals work, how they rule, his trial's over. His trial's concluded, and he has been convicted by 12 of his peers.
So we can start with that. Nick, do you think he was given a fair trial?
I wasn't there. I don't know what went on in that jury room, what the conversation went down. I feel like they used their conscience to judge he was guilty or not. It had to be a unanimous vote, and they convicted him.
And it was.
Yeah, so they had, all 12 of them had to agree to convict. So...
Can either convict him either not guilty or guilty. It had to be unanimous either way.
Yeah. What?
I mean, yeah, I think he got a fair trial. No. He got as fair a trial as you could with it being this high profile.
I don't know. I struggle. So I would like to believe the jury voted their conscience, but with everything that was going on, I couldn't... I don't know that I could have been part of that jury and not been intimidated based on what was going on. So you had BLM outside the door basically the entire time saying, if we don't get the verdict we want, we're going to burn this shit down. Mm-hmm. And I feel like even if you want to make the argument that no one said, well, they're going to burn the shit down, it's a reasonable assumption considering what happened all of last year. Mm-hmm. So I know BLM opened fire on the National Guard troops that were there. I think that was after the jury was already sequestered. And Maxine Waters running her fucking mouth. Even the judge in the trial is like,
he referenced it.
Yeah, he referenced it saying like, you guys may have a good case for a mistrial given Maxine Waters. So if you haven't seen, Maxine Waters was basically on the ground with the BLM protesters saying like, as far as I'm concerned, this is first degree murder. If, he's not convicted, then we gotta just make our presence known, get more, she didn't say get more violent, but she said get more... Confrontational. Mm-hmm. There you go. And the reporter straight asked her, like, well, what if he's only convicted on manslaughter? She's like, no, not manslaughter. As far as I'm concerned, it's first degree murder, which isn't even charged.
Yeah, it wasn't even what he was charged for.
But like I said, the judge actually referenced it in his closing statements about the trial to prosecution and defense, saying like you may have something here. And the judge, for his to his credit, seems pretty irritated that she did it. Like,
yeah.
He definitely seemed to have a problem with it, and I totally back him on what he said because it's like, the judicial branch of our government is a co-equal branch. So Congress has no business, congressional leaders have no business trying to sway the judicial branch in any way, shape, or form. As far as rulings go. And another thing is, so that there's a defense witness, one of his former addresses got coated in pig's blood, and they left a pig's head on the doorstep. Like, there was for sure, at least in my mind, attempts made to intimidate this jury. Now, whether or not that actually influenced their verdict, none of the jurors have come forward and said, I'm intimidated.
And that's what you're going to have, right?
Right.
So you're going to have a juror come forward and say, like, look, I was intimidated that if I didn't vote this,
my city would be on fire.
My city, my house, whatever. And that's just, there's probably no way that happens, because if they were intimidated before,
they're probably just as intimidated now.
I don't think they're going to have a change of heart.
Oh, would you come out if someone knew where you lived and knew your house and threatened to burn it down?
Well,
would you come out and say that happened? Because you're just as likely to have your house burned if you do say that.
Right. So now, if a single juror comes forward and they're like, "Look, I was intimidated," and even if it's anonymous, someone's going to dox these jurors.
Yeah.
Like, it's a real shaft. Like, given everything and how high profile it was, I can see an argument that he got the fairest trial possible, quotes. But I don't think the standard is the fairest trial possible. Like, we're supposed... so there are several things, like, you could have moved the trial out of Minneapolis.
Should have.
You should have.
Well, you look at it, like, we were in Oklahoma, but Timothy McVeigh, they had to move him to Colorado. Because he wouldn't have got a fair trial here.
Yeah, the courts ruled he wouldn't have got a fair trial. Now,
there's an argument that he wasn't going to get a fair... don't get me wrong. Guilty as all get out. But
yes.
There's an argument to be made that it was a formality of a trial.
Yeah.
He was not...
But you see, how high profile he was, that if in Oklahoma, he probably wouldn't have made it out of that courthouse.
Right. So, if you don't know who Timothy McVeigh is, he's the Merle bomber. He blew up the Fed building in Oklahoma City. Our parents were actually alive. Our dad was a first responder. Our mom worked at OU when the Merle bombing happened.
It's very bad. If you don't know, when they announced his death, everyone celebrated because they did a live broadcasting of it. And when the doctor pronounced him dead, you see everyone cheer. It's how high profile he was.
The dude bombed a Fed building and killed a lot of people, and he did it with fertilizer and a van.
Only one went off. The other two didn't. It was supposed to level the building, but it only blew up one side.
Wow.
But
that was enough.
That's a little off topic. I'm saying you should have moved him out of Minneapolis.
Right. So you should have moved him out of Minneapolis. And I'm a big John Wayne fan. I was watching The Sons of Katie Elder, and there's this scene where the Sons of Katie Elder are actually getting framed for murder of the town sheriff. And they come in, they get arrested, and there's just a mob outside the sheriff's building. And it's the new town sheriff because the other one's been murdered. And he's a cocky spit fuck, and he's like, well, we're going to trial and hang him. I'm going to hand, a lynch rope to these mobsters. And the judge for the town is like, no, you're not. And he's like, well, then we need to have a trial tomorrow morning. He's like, what, you want me to pick a jury out of the violent mob outside the door? And honestly, it really rang with a lot of similarity as to what this trial was. Whether or not the jurors wanted, Chauvin lynched, they were still part of the community that was affected by the BLM rioting.
I think it would have been impossible to find... that jury in Minneapolis was as close as you're going to get to a fair trial.
Well, and see, so that's a fair argument, considering, so BLM's going to go anywhere. If you hold the trial in...
Yeah, where would you move to, is my question. What state?
It wouldn't matter.
Hawaii.
You said you would have moved to, Alaska or something where...
I would have moved them to Hawaii.
It really wouldn't have mattered.
So even...
Yeah, people are dedicated enough, they'll go there.
I had the thought... And now this was just a thought, but we could hold the trial in some other foreign country. Now there are several things wrong with that, obviously. One, American citizens don't go through an American court system in a foreign country. And that's wrong. That probably violates your Fifth Amendment rights. And your Third Amendment rights. I think third is... Anyway, but like I said, BLM was going to go wherever this trial was held. Now, so there's two, like, either you can accept that this is the fairest, quotes, jury that he could get, or you accept that, okay, he can't get a fair trial, what do we do? You know, there's two ways to look at this. Like, okay, this was the fairest we could hope for, and we do need to hold him accountable for what he did. Or, okay, we need to hold him accountable, but we can't sell him out to a violent mob. I made a meme, I think I sent it to you guys, but it's a picture of Chauvin, and it said, sacrificed on the altar of leftism. And now, I don't necessarily, like, I could have seen him getting manslaughter. I think especially the murder charges.
When you look at the third-degree murder in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, you don't have to have intent. It's just a regard for life. You don't care about the life.
Right, it's a reckless disregard.
So, I can see how you could get him. Once I looked up the degrees of murder, it's very easy to convict.
Yeah, but so you still have to prove he had reckless disregard for his life. Most of the time with third degree murder, you remember that shooting in Las Vegas where the guy just shot into a country music festival? That's third degree murder. You didn't have a particular target.
Depending on the state.
But in Minnesota law, that would be third degree murder. So it's not like he just opened fire into a group of
two officers said get off his neck.
So he didn't.
Two officers said get off his neck.
All right, so he didn't go out. He didn't wake up that morning saying he was going to kill George Floyd.
Right.
And he probably necessarily didn't intend to kill anybody.
Right.
But, I mean, disregard for his life on the job, I mean, that's what he did. And to me, there's no question. I mean, he was guilty of all three. I just didn't think, personally, he was going to get convicted for all three.
So I do think this is an important thing to mention. I think this has absolutely zero to do with George Floyd's race. I don't think...
Well, I don't think the prosecution did either.
Yeah, I don't think so. Prosecution didn't bring race crime charges. Now, race... Well, we talked about it a little bit, but it's hard to prove. So there's an argument like, okay, well, they wanted to bring it, but then they just couldn't.
You can't bring a hate crime.
Yeah.
Unless it's very what's it?
Unless
you got a KKK member hanging a black guy. You can prove a hate crime there.
Right. Or you got him on tape saying like, I'm going to kill this black person. Yeah. You know, like but they didn't bring any rape.
No. They didn't.
Hate crime charges.
I would feel like it would like destroy your credibility if you try to bring hate crime. It's like you can't prove he did this because George Floyd was black.
Oh, it's for sure. If it was a hate crime, I don't think he gets convicted. Like if the only charge they'd have brought, because you're right, it's impossible to prove. And I mean, if you can prove, like, so all Chauvin has to do is be like, look, I've got,
Unless any of those other cops say he said something and all the cops agree, you can't prove it.
The good news is that it was all recorded.
That is good.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's the up and downside. Because the whole reason this got blown up the way it did is because we live in the information age. We got that 8-second clip, and it was it was everywhere. All over the country and all over the world, really, in a matter of days.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there were protests in Europe.
Yeah, countries everywhere
were pissed off about
had riots. Not just protests, had riots for George Floyd, which is crazy. I mean, Joe Biden said this, and, like, I don't necessarily agree with the spirit of it, but he said he was, as popular, like, civil rights-wise as Martin Luther King, and there's a little bit of truth in that. Because this dude's figure has been massive since he died.
I cannot. No way am I going to stomach a comparison between George Floyd and Martin Luther King.
I'm not going to compare him to Malcolm X.
I'm not
going to compare him to those people.
I mean, at least Malcolm X started a movement.
They were at least progressive members of the society.
I mean, Malcolm X was for sure violent, but
the difference is intent, I think. So, like Malcolm X and MLK, they intended to do civil rights stuff. George Floyd just died.
George Floyd just intended to swallow drugs in the back of a police car.
You think so?
Yeah. He for sure did swallow the drugs. So...
I don't think that's what got him killed.
I do.
I don't think it helped him.
I don't think
it helped him.
75% arterial blockage and then 3 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in the system.
So we feel like we've covered the trial part. Do you think he was given due process?
I mean,
I think it's the best you're going to get.
We'll move on to evidence.
In Minnesota, I think that's the best you're going to get.
I still think so. Until a jury or a juror comes forward, or until the appeals court rules, like I'm just going to say, like I think they got the wrong verdict. I disagree with finding him guilty on 2 counts of murder.
But when you look at the murder...
I wasn't there. Now, I was as well informed as anybody in most of America on this case, besides the jury.
Okay, so how about this? So, like, scale of 1 to 10. So, like, 10 being, like, you may as well have been on the jury, and then 1 being, like, you just saw the verdict yesterday.
I mean, I'm probably 6 or 7.
I'd say I'm about the same.
Like I'm a little less than you. I'm probably like a 5.
Okay.
I didn't keep up much with it.
It's like I'm not watching live court TV all day, every day.
No, so like when I heard they convicted him on all 3, I had to go back and look, because third-degree murder, I always thought was intent. You intended to kill, you planned out the killing. And then I looked, so not all states have third degree, most just have first and second. Very few actually now have first, second, and third. So when I looked at the third degree, it's just a disregard for life. I thought, yeah, you could probably convict him on that.
So the difference between murder and manslaughter is intent. So with third-degree murder, you're firing a gun into a crowd. You're intending to kill somebody, just not anyone in particular.
You don't know who.
Right.
You're not planning on killing a certain person.
Which, I'm not an expert on Minnesota law, but I also don't understand like how you can have unintentional murder. Like, so if you're a drunk driver and you get in a wreck and kill somebody, it's manslaughter. Mm-hmm. Now it's first degree. I think it's first degree manslaughter. But because you didn't intend to kill anybody when you were out there driving. Like, so I again, not an expert on Minnesota law, but I don't understand if you're removing intent from the crime, how is it murder?
Because you had a disregard for his life. That's all it is. That's literally the only thing on the book.
It's an and/or type thing, right? So if you're at a gun range, right? So like in the Vegas scenario, like he meant to kill people, but if you're at a gun range and you end up like you're shooting an Uzi or something, and you fuck up and you end up shooting other people, like that's still third-degree murder, as well as manslaughter.
I'm not the legal mind.
I would need a lawyer. I would need a lawyer to help.
Right, and I think we're kind of all on the same. Like none of us went to law school. None of us are. These are just our opinions on the trial.
Right. Ain't none of us passing the bar anytime soon.
I mean, speak for yourself. You don't know what I'm about. Okay.
I'm not passing
mostly
the bar.
Donuts from the way you look like.
Okay, so for the record, I am not fat.
Boys, he's pretty fat.
I'm like 215. I weighed myself yesterday and 6'1". So how about you just take a step back?
Boy, you got a beer gut that's like 6 inches.
Anyways.
Wow.
Okay, so now we can move on to evidence. So, okay, I guess we'll start with this.
The fentanyl.
Do you think it was fentanyl?
I don't believe it. I don't believe it helps. I don't know if it's a main cause and why he died, but I know for a fact it probably didn't help him live.
So legally it doesn't have to be a main cause. So legally, if the neck compressions or Derek Chauvin were just any part, which who's going to say it didn't play any part, right? Mm-hmm. Then that's technically, you're guilty, right? Okay.
I'm going to say it probably didn't play no part in it.
Really?
So, I've seen the exact scenario besides the drugs reenacted.
So my base thing
What's
is
that?
Like the knee on the neck for 9 minutes. I've seen that reenacted.
I've seen it. I'll agree with you, and the guy's completely fine.
Now, is this Steven Crowder's video?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. No. Because he's not on his neck. He's on his shoulder blade in the video.
Chauvin was on his shoulder blade.
Chauvin was on his neck for a long
time. Okay. I've been choked out before, and before you die, you pass out from a lack of oxygen. That's how you drown. Anyone who you don't die from like you get knocked out. Mm-hmm. So why wasn't he knocked out first? That's my question.
He was.
Well, so yeah, the defense or the prosecution would argue that he was unconscious. And Chauvin stayed on him. But then they come back and they also say, well, Chauvin stayed on him after his heart stopped beating. And it's like, well, that doesn't make sense.
You can't prove that.
Sure you can.
Can you from a video
so good?
Can you prove from a shoddy video that his heart stopped here?
We can tell from autopsy evidence. We can tell from video evidence. We can tell from a lot of stuff. These people are experts on this.
So, as far as autopsy evidence, there was no damage.
Doesn't have to be.
No damage to his airway.
Even Dr. Fowler said it's not a majority of cases.
What, for choking?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, it's not. So it's a minority of cases, the number of bruising internally. Yep. You don't have to crush a trachea. In other words,
you just have to cut it off.
Right. You just have to suck
inch
air out.
It's like a hose. You just got to kink it.
So if you can think of a water hose, you don't have to break the hose, right? You can just kink it. And that's kind of what it's like.
Okay. Well, then, I
I
guess, are we just hearing arguments? Because you think the evidence backs your point, correct?
What point is that?
The conviction on all charges.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So do you have any, do you want to put evidence out there that supports that idea?
Yeah. So, let's stay on fentanyl for now, because it definitely wasn't fentanyl. So, do we all know what happens with, a drug overdose like that?
Yeah, I don't know fentanyl, but I know most hard narcotics, you usually foam it. Your body tries to reject whatever the overdose is. So usually it's foaming of the mouth, throw up.
Yeah. So
none
of that
That's the normal case of overdose.
So Dr. Chauvin, he's an expert on overdoses, right? So this doctor comes in and he's like, well, what we typically see in an overdose is a long, slow, deep breath. You know, it's almost peaceful if you can imagine that.
Well, it's your body just
I don't
systematically
know about that.
Shutting down.
So you actually...
Well, he's an expert.
That is true, but I guess in fentanyl
OD.
it's different. But you see cocaine people that overdose.
It's not the same type of drug.
That's okay. I'm gonna make that clear.
I mean, it's an opioid, so it'd be the same type of drug overdose as heroin, I presume.
So I know for cocaine, it's you're hyperventilating. You're like
yeah.
and then you just collapse like a seizure.
So
most people who overdose on cocaine die of cardiac arrest because your heart gives out.
Yeah, because it's going too fast.
So it definitely with a fentanyl overdose, what you would expect to see is slow, casual breaths, or I'm sorry, not slow. Slow, long, deep breaths. So
you're trying to catch your breath after
right. And what we have seen, so that would mean the total number of breaths would shrink, right? Because if they're longer...
He's trying to take in more air.
Right.
And, yeah, okay.
And what we see is that he takes about the same number of breaths as we would expect he would see. And usually, Dr. Tobin was saying that there's a 40% difference, right? So, this isn't something that you would miss. He said there's no way you would be able to misunderstand this. If it was an overdose, we would be able to know, here's how. Here's what we see with an overdose. And here's what we don't see in Floyd's case.
Now, I'm not going to doubt the credibility of this man. He's an expert in his field, but can you see that from a shoddy video? If it's body cam footage, it's right near there, I can understand.
From the autopsy, he can tell... I mean, he was given all these documents. This is what he does for a living.
Okay.
As an expert witness for prosecution. Mm-hmm. That's what this is his job.
So just to review the evidence and give his determination.
So
was he in the autopsy room, or was he just
not when it happened? Given the evidence afterwards.
So he was given the folder or whatever.
He was given more than honestly the jury was probably aware of.
So, but my question is, can you really get how long you took a breath in a folder?
Well, it's sort of like an astrophysicist can tell you stuff about space that you and I just won't be able to understand.
Yeah, but the difference is the astrophysicist can't grasp a black hole and take a look at it. Mm-hmm. You have an autopsy report, a physical body.
Right. Right, but wouldn't that go to the case that he's got everything he needs?
But how
the astrophysicist is limited
by
he
didn't investigate
what he can look at.
I don't know.
Well, and who was the witness? Who was the witness that was basically is like I'm looking at the video and I can tell you right now just from the video what's going on, and several doctors on mainstream news, well mostly Fox and Ben Shapiro's wife, but have come out and said any doctor who can diagnose death by watching a video, that's a world no doctor exists. That's that that good. I don't know if you ever seen House. But even House needs to see a patient.
Right.
You can't look at a video and diagnose cause of death.
But this dude wasn't given just a video. This dude was given everything. And he was like, look, we can tell the carbon monoxide in his blood. We can tell by his respiratory rate after his heart. So your heart almost tracks how much it's been pacing. And we can go based off of that. We can go based on how dense your lungs are. And basically what he's saying is that if it was fentanyl, and it's not likely that it was, we would see a very different type of death, right? So the argument for fentanyl is that even if Chauvin wouldn't have seen him that day, he would have OD'd in his room or his car or whatever.
Had he taken the same dose. Now, he did, ingest. So evidence
Right.
suggests he ingested in the back of the police
Right.
car,
More
which he
likely
had
not-
done before.
More likely, probably not get a heavier charge.
Right. And the guy who did the actual autopsy didn't think fentanyl played hardly any role
well,
in his
one,
autopsy report. Well, the only independent one, right? The
who
one
was
that
hired
they used
by the
for
family.
No. He worked for the Hennepin County. He could have been hired. He was the first one given the body after the ER. Couldn't have been.
I
hired
thought the
by
first one that was given it ruled it.
Ruled it.
I could be wrong.
Well, only one was submitted for the record, and that was the Hennepin County medical examiner. And he's independent. He's not paid by the cops. He's not paid by the family. Nothing.
He's got no dog in this fight.
And he
He was just doing his job.
He ruled it a homicide, which basically autopsy people get behind this thing called the veil of ignorance. So in other words, they just give him a body and they say, "How did he die?" They don't tell him
Circumstances.
They don't tell him he was high. They don't tell him we're in an altercation with the police. They just give him the body. They say, "Tell us what killed him." And he was like, "Well, clearly a homicide." He said he did have drugs in his system.
3 times the lethal dose of fentanyl.
Right. But he didn't think that fentanyl killed him.
But see, that's crazy. How could you have 3 times the lethal dose of a drug in your system and you have no suspect? Now, again,
If you
I'm
die
not,
before it kills
so
you.
autopsy people are a doctor.
So if you take 3 times the lethal amount of fentanyl and I shoot you in the head, you die before the fentanyl could kill you.
Yeah, but he wasn't shot in the head. He died from what plausibly is asphyxia.
That's
but if I
sort of the argument the doctor is making. Like, it may have potentially killed him, but there's no way to know that. But we know for a fact what did kill him, from his perspective.
Well, if there's no way to know for a fact what did kill him,
well, if I
there's
cut
no
off
way
your
to know it
oxygen
played
supply-
an effect, how do you know that?
Well, we can tell at the time he died, fentanyl was not it.
See, but how can you say that? And again, not a doctor, not a lawyer. Just saying, like, how if you say, like, okay, it may have played a part, then how can you say for sure? Like, so the sun may be blue, but it's for sure red. Like, how do you unite those two ideas? Because if you're saying, like, okay, he may have this, then you can't say for certain that B is correct.
So it'd be like
because A is still a maybe.
You have a 3 times amount whatever drug that would kill you normally, but I choke you out and I just keep choking you out.
So
You can't breathe. You're knocked out.
Let me give him your other example, because that was a really good one. So if someone has been drinking, right, and I shoot them in the arm, right, alcohol is a blood thinner, and it kills you, right? What killed the person? The fact that he was drunk, or the fact that he got shot in an artery?
I believe it's a mixture.
So the problem here is then the act of arresting him was causing his death then.
Well, that's what he thought. He ruled it a homicide. He didn't know he was a cop. He didn't know. And he was the one who found the fentanyl. So, I mean, like, he knew the fentanyl was there, but he said, that's not what killed. This was not an overdose.
So what is it? Dr. David Fowler has contradicting evidence then? Or a contradicting opinion on the evidence.
It's true. And so from my understanding, he had access to the autopsy the same as everybody does. You can actually go look at it right now. And, but that's all he has. He didn't have footage of the autopsy. He wasn't there, obviously. He's from Maryland, I think.
Well, none of them were there.
Right. Except the dude who tested.
Yeah.
Right. And so he gave contradicting testimony in the cross-examination. He was like, well, because the first thing he said was like, it might be carbon monoxide. And then the prosecution was like, well, carbon monoxide, like the car wasn't running, it can't be carbon monoxide.
Well, and he would have been dead before he left the car,
exactly.
unconscious.
Yeah. Right. And carbon monoxide builds up in you after you die. That's how they know he was dead on scene. Is because
the level of carbon monoxide in his body.
Which they did not use. They did not use that evidence. Sadly, the prosecution.
Well, that means
prosecution.
Yeah, the prosecution didn't unfortunately do their jobs and submit that for the record.
Well, and another lack of prosecution doing their jobs. They never offered immunity to George Floyd's drug dealer. So the person in the car with George Floyd was his drug dealer. The person who had assumedly sold him the narcotics.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't offer him immunity to get his testimony. They would rather be like, no, we're just going to let you plead the fifth so that they don't hear
right.
what you have to say.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the defense cannot offer immunity. So that was strictly the role of the prosecution, and they chose not to. Which does raises questions as far as like, well, why wouldn't you just want him to testify if you're so sure of your case?
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, the prosecution has a job to present the best case against a person.
To be clear, that is not how that works, because it is your right as an American to plead the fifth, and they do not get to say, well, you had a chance to testify, so that implies guilt because you didn't testify. That is not.
No, the only time you can't plead the fifth is a subpoena.
If you offer him immunity, then he's got no reason to plead the fifth because he's immune from any charges that could come up as testimony.
Right,
so
but
that's the principal argument of the.
But if he wasn't immune, right?
Yeah. So if anyone wanted to
testify. Right. So without offering immunity, absolutely, like I get pleading the fifth because you're a drug dealer. You're actively committing crimes. Like I get not wanting to testify against yourself, but if you. So why doesn't the prosecution honor?
Mm-hmm.
And now the prosecution does. I don't necessarily think they have the same responsibilities as the defense, but they do. They're trying to present the best case. So logically, one could assume like, okay, you didn't offer him immunity to try to get his testimony because you think it would hurt your case.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you have the right not to criminate yourself.
I mean, and that's one thing that I want to touch on too. Like the whole first like almost 4 or 5 days of this trial was eyewitness testimony, but not eyewitness testimony to what happened, but how what happened made you feel. And I've seen, so Ben Shapiro is one of them, but I've seen a couple legal minds be like, I don't understand why this was even allowed. Because how like onlookers feel about a certain topic has absolutely no bearing on the legality of this case.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why the judge, third-degree murder being allowed in, that's a Ben Shapiro gripe. I honestly...
Well, they had it at first and it got dropped, right?
Yeah, one judge dropped it, and then
this one...
The current judge reinstated
it. Yeah.
And then... But the one that I've got multiple, and I don't have their names because it's just mostly on Fox News hosts, because I haven't seen anybody on CNN that's actually like, oh, I don't know that this is the right verdict. But they're like, I don't understand why the whole first 4 or 5 days of this testimony is how this case made you feel. Because, again, that has absolutely no bearing on how this case should be tried.
Facts don't care about your feelings.
Yeah, facts don't care about your feelings. And why are we hearing eyewitness testimony from people who were like, man, watching what happened makes me really sad. So, well, of course, no one wants... I'm of the opinion there are only a select few people in this world that the world would be better off if they had just died. So you're like Hitler.
Yeah, most Hitler guys are dead.
Like, if you kill Hitler in World War I, like, okay, the world is better off. I think we can kind of all agree on that. I'm not of the opinion that the world is better off because George Floyd is dead.
Hell, but I get sad when a dog dies. I have to watch a dog die.
Right.
I get sad when a person dies. No dumb idiot's sad.
Like, it's tragic that George Floyd died under the circumstances he did. I don't think Chauvin caused them. But my whole point is why are we taking the emotional influence this had on civilians into account into a criminal trial?
So I know what helped the defense is... So the defense, they would ask a yes or no question. Just a simple yes or no, like, did you watch what happened? And the person they were asking would say yes, and then they keep adding.
Yeah, so
the judge got on.
The judge got upset because it was the defendant was clearly like just frustrated and tired. He goes, again, yes or no. It's all I need. Just a yes or no. And they kept adding. The judge goes, I would stop.
Yeah, he straight looks at him like there's footage of it.
And he goes, just answer the question, don't add more.
That was the off-duty EMT, right?
Yeah.
The one lady.
Yeah, so she basically just kept throwing in her opinion to questions that were not about her opinion. So, like, if you listen to the doctors talk, I mean, they've clearly done this before.
Yeah.
So they ask them a question, and they answer strictly the question. And then at the end, they'll ask, do you agree with a high degree of medical certainty, da-da-da-da-da. And then they'll answer yes, no, right? So, like, that's how it is. But that's not what this girl was doing.
She kept adding her own opinion to it. And the judge and the defendant were clearly just fed up.
Yeah.
And the judge had to say, that's not helping y'all.
Well, the judge was fed up with a lot in this trial. So he was fed up with BLM, he was fed up with Maxine Waters, and he was fed up with politicians chiming in on the case. And that was, again, part of his closing statements to defense and prosecution.
To be fair to this judge, he was fair that whole trial. He was fair to both sides of the trial.
See... He
defended the prosecution, saying no, you're too late, you can't introduce this new evidence. and he tells the defendant like, "Hey,
So-
he's toeing a line. He's trying his best."
I agree with Nick. I think it was completely fair.
On the right side of the aisle, I don't think he was unfair. I think it should have been ruled a mistrial before. Like I think even he wanted to rule it a mistrial, but he was not going to play them. He was not going to play them cards. Like especially given his closing statements. But a lot of people on the right are saying like, well, this judge is definitely pro prosecution. I'm like, I don't really see that. That's kind of like the people on the right saying like, debate guy, Trump and Biden, who kept getting he's a guy on
Chris
Fox
Wallace.
News. Yeah, people turned on Chris Wallace saying like, Chris Wallace just went after Trump, and I'm like, I don't really see that. Like, Chris Wallace was frustrated because Trump wouldn't shut the fuck up.
Like that judge was frustrated, and I thought he played fair. He didn't care to either side. He was
and we've discussed like judges in our society. If you don't hold judges as like some of the most moral people, then we're kind of at a loss.
Now I'm not gonna defend any of the judges in the 1960s who were clearly racially biased. But if you're gonna say that about Judge today, you're no offense to anyone, you're just a moron to me. They are the most moral people you can probably meet. They're most fair.
And they definitely have the most they have no incentive.
They got
to
the
go
hardest
job.
job. They have to decide how long to convict somebody if they're guilty.
I don't think that's the hardest job.
That's pretty
Especially not in this case. I think the hardest job was actually convicting.
Yeah, well,
I think the jury had the hardest job here.
I definitely think he did a good job for making sure that like his rights weren't violated.
Like I said, when the prosecution tried to come back, if you don't know, so how court works, the prosecution has evidence, they give it to the defense so the defense can rebuttal.
Yeah, you have to share evidence between the defense.
They have to share, and the prosecution wanted to introduce the new because it's a fact that he had too much carbon monoxide in his lungs. The prosecution wanted to introduce that, and the judge said no, it's too late.
Well, they kept referencing something. I can't remember if it's the carbon monoxide.
And the judge almost ruled a mistrial because of it.
Yeah, he said you mention it one more time, and this is mistrial.
Because you have to give the defense enough time to look at the evidence, form a rebuttal.
Right.
It's a process.
So you can have.
And they wanted to skip the process, and the judge said no.
So if it was a smoking gun. That's different.
That is, if it's new evidence comes up in the middle of the trial, that's different. That is completely different. Like, well, they found out it was the fentanyl that killed him or something like that. That's the only thing you can do.
Right.
But if it's something you had previously and you just never used,
well, and you typically start if you suddenly Law and Order, someone comes whispers in your ear new evidence, you call a sidebar. And then you get called to quarters and you discuss it, and then the judge rules on whether or not it's admissible evidence or not. Right. And like I said, I think the judge gave him a fair shake. I do still disagree with his opinion about a mistrial. I think there should have been a mistrial far earlier in the case than it was even considered. But that's not my place. So I may not like the verdict. I may think that there's I honestly think at least a moderate probability that these jurors were intimidated.
Okay. Probably, if I was the judge, I would have probably sequestered the jury.
That's another thing I wanted to touch on. So in O.J. Simpson, the jury was sequestered for 294 days. So they were sequestered for way beyond what the actual trial was. Now, and this is, no matter what side you're looking at, this is probably the most high-profile case since O.J. Simpson.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole country knows about this. And I mean, so, another thing I'm going to touch on later, but the fact that we have to hold our breath waiting to watch and see, like, so remember in the election when cities were boarding up and preparing just for riots in case Trump won? Mm-hmm. The fact that we have reached that stage in society is abysmal to me.
Makes me sad.
Like okay, if the verdict isn't agreeable to this other group of people, then Minneapolis burns to the fucking ground. That's disgraceful, and I don't think that anybody here would disagree with that. Anyway, so we should have moved the trial, and we should have gotten a sequestered jury.
I wouldn't have moved the trial. I definitely would have sequestered though, because they were going to get doxxed no matter where they were, and plus jury of his peers kind of thing.
I think that they should have moved it out of state. I'm to Alaska.
Wouldn't have
You
mattered.
moved it to Alaska.
Yeah.
No one ain't gonna follow you in Alaska.
Move it to Alaska or Hawaii.
It wouldn't have mattered.
I think it
don't
would have.
I don't think it
You
changed
think
the
it-
verdict.
Airfare to how. You may not think it changes the verdict,
I
but
don't
it would
think it
at
changes
least
the verdict.
keep boots off the ground. Like BLM
It would at
wouldn't have
least
been in-
eliminate any chance that jury being intimidated. It
Right.
eliminates every chance.
Maybe.
Maybe you move them to Alaska. You think?
Maybe.
Maybe.
That's
Hard to know.
That's a fair point.
in a society that values you get the fairest trial possible. How can you say it's the fairest trial possible if you think that maybe he could have gotten a fairer trial in Hawaii or a fairer trial in Alaska?
Mm-hmm.
Because let's be honest, if they moved to California, he ain't gonna get a fair trial in California.
No, I mean he's not going to get a fair.
That's like saying Timothy McVeigh wouldn't have gotten a fair trial in California. Do you really think that? No, of course you don't. Nobody thinks that, right? Nobody thinks that.
I think Timothy.
But this was a unanimous verdict, guys.
But it had to be. It had to be.
It had to be unanimous.
Well,
So
of course it does.
and these rioters were like these BLM protesters and Maxine Waters are on news networks saying if it's not what we want, we're going to burn it. So if you come back as a hung jury on 3rd and 2nd degree murder, which honestly is what I thought was going to be most likely, if you come back and you say no, we can't vote acquittal or convict,
Well,
then there would have been riots.
it would have been so like it's basically up to the judge how long he's going to let the jury
Yeah.
figure it out.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have let him argue if they were really stuck, he could have let him argue for over a year,
Yeah.
right? But he really wanted a unanimous verdict. And
I think
when
he told him that before he went into chamber.
Well, all judges want a unanimous
So,
verdict.
due to new law from the Supreme Court, Ramos versus Louisiana, every guilty or non-guilty for a criminal case, state or federal, has to be unanimous. Guilty or not guilty.
Right, you can't get a simple majority. You can't get
Nope.
7 and
Nope.
6.
From now on, since April 16th, I think, 2020, it has to be unanimous. Any criminal trial, in state or federal. So he had to say before the jury went in, it has to be unanimous for a guilty or not guilty verdict.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That is now the Supreme Court.
Which really benefits American citizens in their rights in criminal trials.
Yeah.
Because that just makes hung jury. So a hung jury just means that the case is dropped.
Yeah, it's like we'll move it to a later date.
Yeah.
It-
And you're just going to keep... Now it increases the possibility of perpetual trials where just over and over again you're getting the same things.
It's like we'll be back
But-
in like a year and a half for this again for another hung jury.
Yeah. But, I mean, anyway. I think there are things that could have been done that should have been done
I
that would
definitely
increase his...
Now-
the degree of fairness given to Chauvin.
Now, why were you the one who said the jury was doxxed? Or they
yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
said
At
that
that,
on,
no offense, at that point they.
I'm arresting
a new-
whoever the fuck docks that jury needs to be arrested.
it's impossible.
It needs to be
Bullshit.
either needs to be a mistrial or you get a new jury.
Yeah,
Well, here's the thing: the jury doesn't know.
the jury don't
But the
know they
people,
were doxxed.
the people know.
They know now, but
I don't
think that
care.
matters.
I
Like
don't-
if you've doxed a jury, if you're out there doxing jury members, you're a piece of shit.
yeah.
It's like, especially on this high profile of a case.
Right. Well,
Like, if-
because I have absolutely no. So if a juror came forward and said I've been intimidated, and then so that even like if they know they're doxed now, that even more decreases the likelihood of them admitting it if it happened.
But they weren't intimidated during the time of the trial. So, like, if you pretend you're in a jury, right, and you're sequestered, and
So when did it come out?
someone,
When were they doxxed?
I don't know, probably as soon as they were picked.
Well, then they weren't sequestered until like the verdict.
Well, in theory, you're not supposed to watch any of the news, but these are people. So,
Why
honestly, I wouldn't have watched the news being on the
Right,
trial.
trying to be a fair. But even if
No,
you,
it's just been the last thing I wanted to fucking talk about.
no. So, but what if you're married and you come home and your wife's like, well, did you hear about this, and this?
Yeah.
And it's
Someone
like,
came
so
to our
there's-
house.
When I say sequestered, I mean put up in a hotel room that's.
I
got-
want witness protection
Well, that's what they
level.
were
Yes.
at the verdict. So just a quick one, but no, they didn't know that they were doxxed until after. We know that for certain, because that's what the people were saying. The defense was saying, and so the defense asked for a mistrial. I think like 5 times.
I saw 3.
It was
but-
almost every single day during the last week. Like when things were really like riling up, he was like, "Dude, are you serious? Like this is like, this is grounds for a mistrial. And he's like, nope. I trust that the jury has been following the rules.
Well, and so the prosecution brought up, like, the court is obligated to trust that the jury is following their rules.
Yeah,
and I mean, it's all you can do.
That is the default position.
Right. Which is, I mean, default position is you are obeying laws in America.
Right.
Like, that's just how it is.
Right.
So I can understand, like, because none of these jurors are coming forward and saying, I have been intimidated, I cannot just assume they've been intimidated just because of actions.
You can't ask them either. Like, have you been intimidated? Personally, have you been intimidated?
Yeah,
Well,
they
he
have
actually
to come.
can
They
and
have
he does. He can and he does in the reading of the verdict. If you watch the reading of the verdict live, he goes to each individual juror by number and says, is this your true and honest opinion? And in effect, that is, have you been intimidated?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what that is. That's what purpose it serves, is to make sure you weren't bullied in that jury room
Right.
to voting a certain way, and then being like, no, I was, at that point, you can raise your hand and be like, no, this motherfucker over here.
Right. And that's why I think a mistrial, to me, there's just no way. There's no way a mistrial happens.
Until someone comes forward.
Yeah,
I don't...
Or
Nor
the
do I think there
appeals
should be.
Or the appeals court has a difference of opinion. That's the two things. So if a juror comes forward, then I think there's no question there should be a mistrial.
Mm-hmm.
The appeals court, if the appeals court rules that this wasn't a mistrial, this is done.
Yeah, it's
Like,
done.
you can't appeal an appeal. You appeal once, and whether you get a retrial. So the appeals court can either rule a mistrial and a retrial, or a mistrial and acquittal. Like, so based on what's happened in this, like, we can just scrub the record.
So all that they can really do, so they can't hear evidence, they can't hear arguments. Their job is to make sure, like, okay,
Was this fair?
Did the judge defend you and make sure your rights weren't violated? And to me, it's clear. Like, no, his rights were not violated.
I don't know how you can say it's clear. With people like Maxine Waters and BLM out on the floor, like, I don't know how you can say that that's just a clear, for sure fact.
I
well,
feel
because
like
as it
I
turns
don't
out,
understand the confidence.
as it turns out, like, people don't, necessarily care so much, like, what, like, representatives, like, most of those jurors probably didn't even know who Maxine Waters was when they heard that. I mean, that'd be like if someone said, like, Tom Cole said da-da-da-da. It's like, well, most Oklahomans don't know who their representative is, right? And it's like, well, their opinion doesn't mean as much to the jury as we might think.
This is a congressional chairwoman
Mm-hmm.
on the ground with violent protesters.
I'm telling you, it doesn't shape opinion the way you might think.
Given the fact that Minneapolis burned for almost
How about
6
this?
months after George
If you
Floyd's
were
death,
on a jury, would you go against your principal because your representative said, like, if you don't, we're going to be confrontational?
yes.
And that's
And
assuming
given
you
the-
even heard
if-
it.
given the fact that the last time you got confrontational, half of Minneapolis burned, yeah.
I would not.
The fact that I wouldn't probably want to walk
would.
out of that courthouse without bodyguards, yeah.
I would.
If I was on that jury and I didn't know my name was Docs, you walk out of that courtroom,
there is
your life
there is
sentence?
no
Jesus.
scenario where I violate my principle to send what I think is an innocent man to jail for 30 years. There is no way I violate my principles and convict an innocent man. No scenario.
And that's great.
There's
that's
no
fantastic,
intimidation.
but you don't have a wife, you don't have kids. Like, it's not just you that's going to get attacked.
And
Yeah.
I understand that, but at the same time, like, it's a principled thing. And so far,
So
the jurors have said
Would you
so
risk
far,
your family over your principles? Would you risk them attacking your
I
family?
mean, so the
you don't
honorable answer is
sacrifice-
absolutely.
Yeah.
You don't sacrifice one for the other. I mean, this is what Greg Gutfield said. He said, I'm happy it was a guilty verdict. And I was like, what?
This is not, no, this is
the
the counter
hell?
to what Greg Gutfield said.
I was like, what the hell are you talking about, Greg? Like, his was as bad as Nancy Pelosi's reaction. Nancy Pelosi basically thanked George Floyd for dying.
yeah.
As if George Floyd had a choice, right?
Well, she laid him up like a messianic figure. She really did.
Think so?
You know, yeah. Like, what she said was basically it was very similar to a Christian prayer. Thank you, George Floyd, for your sacrifice. You will be synonymous with
He's a martyr.
justice. And yeah, and he's not. That's another thing that I really want to. It fucking irritates the shit out of me. But so George Floyd did not deserve to die. I want to make that perfectly clear. But he is also in no way, shape, or form a martyr. This dude has been to prison 9 times. 9 times.
Okay, let's admit it. So, like, Martin Luther King Jr., he's a perfect example of a good martyr.
That's a martyr.
At least he went to jail for for standing up for his civil rights.
Yeah.
He was trying to better his community. I don't know what George Floyd went to jail.
Assault and drugs.
Okay. Not much of a productive member of society, in my opinion.
Oh, and armed robbery.
You don't have to be to not get executed by the
No,
police.
I just said he should not have died the way he did.
I know, but like I'm saying, like this is irrelevant to me.
Should you make someone a martyr if they're not a productive member of society?
Right. Should we make you a saint because you were a piece of shit?
Should the Germans make Hitler a martyr when he killed him? They're like, no, of course not. He did terrible things.
Mm-hmm. Did Hitler deserve a trial if he would have been alive?
He wouldn't have got a fair one. Let's be honest. He wouldn't have got a fair trial.
But
no, he would have gone a war crimes trial.
No member of the Nazi Party at the end of World War II got a fair trial. Let's be honest here.
Yeah, no, at Nuremberg they were coming for blood.
Mm-hmm.
Hell, they only gave one guy a fair trial because he was 90-something years old and he was dying anyway.
When he was
like
12 million people,
right?
That's a little different. But my whole this dude was not a saint. He doesn't deserve the lifting to sainthood that he is receiving. And I find it's just incredibly distasteful. How does the woman that he robbed at gunpoint with 5 other men, how does she feel watching him get his face plastered all over as a hero?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how does the kid feel who got handed a counterfeit 20? And granted, that's not the same as getting robbed at gunpoint, but still, how do all the people he detrimentally affected throughout his life feel about watching this man be raised to the level of a martyr?
Mm-hmm.
It's fucking ridiculous.
I think
you can say he shouldn't have died the way he did, but he also does not deserve the level of just worship that he's getting.
Mm-hmm. I think they're saying more of justice failed George Floyd, which I think is absolutely true. I mean, he wasn't given for a counterfeit 20, for a $20 bill, he lost his life. Right? That's...
Maybe don't pay with a counterfeit 20.
That's ridiculous.
And swallow a bunch of drugs in the back of a cop car.
I don't think so. Well, we've established that it wasn't fentanyl.
No.
Okay, well, either...
One guy thinks it wasn't fentanyl.
2 to 1, Gary.
Actually,
it's 2 to 1, you lose.
It's way more than just one guy. All but one doctor, and even one doctor, he didn't say, I'm sure, what you think he said. But, I mean, all the doctors were pretty well okay, look, the fentanyl may or may not, but that's not important. What's important is what did, and we know what did, and here's how. And I think that's important testimony. So what do you think really got him convicted? Do you think it was more... Do you think it was...
The disregard for life.
He
didn't care.
No, I meant speaking from an outside. So do you think the jury was intimidated? Do you think it was the evidence? Do you think it was what are we thinking?
Until a jury member comes forward, he got a fair to me, the person that he got a fair trial, he's guilty. Until someone comes forward and says otherwise, and you can prove it with evidence. You got a fair trial, you lost.
That's my whole problem with that argument is that the argument that the jury was intimidated. It's okay, well it's not really based on evidence because the jury is telling you flat out nothing influenced my opinion. This is my true and honest verdict.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of what you have to go with. So it's the same thing the election. People were saying I've got suspicions. And that's the way I feel about this trial. I've got my suspicions. I really don't see how people couldn't have been intimidated. But until you tell me you were intimidated, I've got no factual way to turn this over. And we live in a society that the judicial system operates on facts. If you can't if you're not going to tell me...
you ain't got the facts to back up your mouth, then sorry. You lost me.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I've got my suspicions. I think the jury... I don't see how the jury couldn't have been intimidated. But if they're not, and they're not saying that they are, then this is the verdict.
So assuming now we're all kind of in agreement, the jury was at least honest and gave their honest verdict, right?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So...
I mean, that's not what I said.
What do you think convinced them? What would it take to convince you guys that he was guilty right there? Because for over half the country, it was just the video evidence.
So what would convince... Okay. Knowing the law, knowing what the law in Minnesota is, it's the simple disregard for life that he
Okay.
didn't get off George Floyd when he was told by 2 officers to.
So your
So here's evidence.
point would be
Basically.
evidence according to the law.
According to
Okay.
the law, he disregarded George Floyd's life. Ergo, he's at least guilty on third-degree murder,
Okay.
in my opinion, and then manslaughter.
No.
And
That
then,
is
Garrett,
my
what would
opinion.
it have? What from the trial would it have taken you?
What do you mean?
Like, what would it take to convince you that Chauvin was guilty?
I mean, it would have taken just blatant evidence. And so that's part of my thing is
Okay.
like we have we have difference of opinions looking at the same evidence on both sides. So it comes down to which witness you're going to trust more. Do you trust more the prosecution's witness that said this, or do you trust more the defense witness that says that?
Well, okay, in my opinion, no one wants to be on the wrong side of history. No one wants to
No one.
support a said-be rapist and be wrong. So it's safer to say, yeah, he's a murderer and agree with him than say, no, he's not a murderer and then be wrong.
I don't think that's what happened.
I don't think that's what happened, but
He's
it's
right.
It's no one wants to be on the side of a racist, a murderer, or a pedophile.
No one wanted to be on the side of letting Chauvin off, and then come to find out, like, he told his buddy 2 nights before at the bar, like, man, this guy Floyd,
He's
got
out.
my eye on
I'm
him."
out to get him.
Yeah.
Or it's quota time. I need
Right.
a black guy.
And I know
Also-
He knows this guy's gonna do it, or
So-
something like that. So no one wants to be on the wrong side of history. I don't think that's what happened. I think they voted on their conscience.
So, I mean, take this for what it's worth. So, like, you were talking about, like, who do you trust? Like, which one? So, the people who testified for the prosecution were way closer to Minneapolis. Like the dude who did the autopsy, the ER doctor, the EMTs, all the witnesses, all the police officers there.
Well, again, and I'm just totally disregarding all the emotional testimony.
Yeah,
because I
fair
think that's a
enough,
load
fair
of
enough,
shit.
Fair enough, but that's not. I'm not talking about the EMT girl. I'm talking about the people who tried to get Floyd back to life, and the officers were like, "No, he's still detained," and they're like, "No, he's dying," and they were like, "No, you can't do that." And so the ER doctor that pronounced him dead, the police chief. I think they had 9 police officers, 4 Minneapolis police testify against him. Not one supported him. The closest witness that supported Chauvin was from Ohio. He'd never been to Minnesota he hasn't been to Minnesota in years, right? So all the relevant people to the case
And the community.
are on the side of the prosecution. So I don't find it unreasonable at all to trust them because I mean they were firsthand.
But here's the thing. For a criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. So if a reasonable person could look at the same evidence you are and think of, okay, and have a different opinion than you, then you shouldn't be convicting him. Because it's beyond a reasonable doubt
but
that he is guilty.
But I'm going to say it again: facts don't care about your feelings.
Right, but then no,
If the facts say he had too much carbon monoxide in his lungs, and he was pronounced dead before the fentanyl overdose could kick in, I don't care what your opinion is. He died of the carbon monoxide,
and that's fair.
I tend to agree with Nick.
So like
I'm just saying, like, when the evidence is the requirement for the evidence for conviction is beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
So if you've got difference of opinions looking at the same evidence, so you've got a and of course the defense is going to have different witnesses, but that prosecution witness has to convince you so much that the defense witness is wrong, which I'm not saying is impossible. It happens literally all the time because we have a functioning court system. But beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty of 2nd and 3rd degree murder, I disagree with that. Now, that doesn't mean that, I don't have all the evidence that the jury had. I didn't sit through this whole trial for a week and a half. There are things I would want changed, but if all things considered, this is just about wrapped up. Unless the appeals court rules a mistrial or a juror comes forward, this is done and said.
yeah.
So what would y'all? I mean, just staying on that for a second. If y'all had to wager, do you think he gets the mistrial? Do you think he should get the mistrial? We'll start with what do we think first, and then we'll go with what do we think.
I think he's going to get convicted. I think he's going to get max 29 years, like he said.
That's the maximum sentence.
He's going to get the max.
Well, they'll get the max.
Yeah,
He'll get the max.
I don't know what they'll give him.
But like until someone comes forward, this is a done deal to me. This is you might as well seal it up and put it home.
I mean, I agree. Like, I think he got a fair trial. I don't think anyone was swayed in any way. I think there may have been attempt. I mean, for sure.
Until otherwise, right? Until facts come up saying otherwise, I'm sorry. It won't go past appeal.
I think he deserves a mistrial and appeals.
Do you think he will, though? Do you think he'll get it?
No.
Okay.
I do not.
So would you say then
and if
the
the
justice
appeals
system
court
has failed him?
I don't know. So I think, in my opinion, I think he should be, again, not a lawyer, not a judge, but I do trust these judges. If the appeals court looks at all the same evidence and says, look, you're not warranted a mistrial, then I've got to just go with that. Because otherwise, you have lost faith in the entire judicial process. And I'm not going to bring myself to do that. You can be a cynic like that, and I'm not going to. I trust these judges if the appeals court says, and just like I don't like the judge in the trial itself. Like, I disagree at what point I would have called a mistrial, but he finds it in his legal mind to have not done so.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the appeals court might have a differing opinion, but that's fine. Just like the judge before him on the trial said, no, third-degree murder's the fuck out. What are you doing bringing this here? And then he's like, no, all right, go ahead and bring third degree.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the different opinions in legal... I mean, it's the whole reason we've got an argument in the Supreme Court right now about, you know, there's Republicans and 4 Democrats, and we might have to pack the Supreme Court, and da-da-da-da. Like, you can look at the same stuff and have a different opinion about it.
Mm-hmm. But
once the appeals court has spoken, it's said and done. One way or another... And now that the jury has spoken, I mean, honestly, he has been convicted by 12 of his peers. You know, right, wrong, or indifferent, I might disagree with the way they saw it, but, I mean, that's the system here. And we've got the best system in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just...
And, I mean, look, don't get me wrong, sometimes juries get stuff wrong.
Right. They're people too.
They're just as
same as with judges. They're
people too. Well, the judges really don't. I don't know that judges can do wrong because their job isn't to do.
Their job is sentencing.
Their job is
but they
just
can
to make sure
they
that
can
your
issue
rights
mistrials and stuff like that.
Okay, so that's true. So I guess you're right. Okay.
So in a way, a judge can.
He for sure has a important role in the process.
Yes.
Right.
So
probably one of the most important roles. Because you can have a sham trial, right, and have all your rights be violated, and it's like, well, the judge is there to make sure he's there, in a sense, to defend you, to make sure that they don't
violate any of your rights.
Right. Okay, so one thing. Do we have anything else we want to talk about for now?
I mean, I think that pretty much sums up my opinion. Like, I'm sorry George Floyd died. The world's not better off without him, despite his criminal record.
Do you think the police force is better with Chauvin off the force?
Yeah. You took a reckless act and it cost a man.
I don't know what his record is, but I'm at the very least, even if he's guilty of manslaughter, yeah.
You did a reckless act.
Like I said, I could see manslaughter. I could for sure see manslaughter.
Could you see third-degree murder if you now knowing the definition in Minnesota?
But it's just
could you see that Chauvin disregarded Floyd's life?
With third-degree murder, it's a group thing. Like, you're shooting. So if he would have, if there had been a group of black people,
depending
on
the
state, and he just
tackled
one, and then did what he did to George Floyd, then okay, I could see third degree.
But
it's still, he didn't wake up with the intent to kill anybody.
But I
don't think he had reckless disregard for his life. And the whole reason I think he didn't have reckless disregard is because this hold isn't outlawed. This hold was on the books. You are allowed to use it in Minneapolis law.
It is now.
Yeah, it is now. Of course it is now.
But you can't convict someone on something that you made illegal.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, like, this hold, the way he was holding Floyd was now, it may not be the optimal thing that he could have done, but it was an option for the police officers at the time.
One thing we need to make very clear is that police policy is not the same as law, right?
That's true.
So if you do the same hold the police does and you kill a guy, well, you can't quote the police handbook, right?
And say this is okay because you're not an officer.
Yeah. Right. So that's one thing we need to make very clear.
I can't choke Nick out, and if he accidentally dies, walk because the police handbook said it was okay.
Right. There's no way.
Even if
I think that law changed depending on the state for a citizen's arrest. I think so during a citizen's arrest, you're in Oklahoma, you're allowed to hold someone at gunpoint.
Really, and it's not
Yes.
brandishing,
It's not brandishing.
So,
really.
I would say that I could probably choke someone
But
out
citizen's arrests
if he's threatening either
are
me
rare.
or someone else's life.
Okay.
Yes.
I think, again, this is totally
So-
situational. I can't just go up to Garrett, make a citizen's arrest, and
Well,
then
you're
choke
probably-
him out and kill him by accident,
Right, but
and
if I
nothing happens.
Right, but if
He's
I
not
walk in
threatening
and
him.
if I walk in and Wyatt's robbing a liquor store and I choke him out,
Mhm.
then it's not assault anymore. It's
No, it's...
you know what I'm saying? So there's none of us here are
so-
There's a certain term for it.
So
It's an immunity if you do something like this and you accidentally kill somebody. It's it's a civil something.
you're not.
You have immunity.
It's more of like a civil like thing. It's not necessarily criminal, but once you're in like police care, you're in their care.
yeah,
They
have
are
to feed you.
responsible for you. Yeah. And I think that's what he was handcuffed on the ground. I don't really think anyone's gonna like he was in the car for a certain amount of time, right? And then they pulled
Yeah.
him out. And
Well, I don't think anyone's gonna argue like you should have just left George Floyd in the car.
that's what I'm saying. Like, you should have just left him in the car. But
Well, so what do you guys think about the whole like I can't breathe scenario? So the
Well,
time he's in the car, the entire time he's saying I can't breathe.
okay, so as far as just to wrap back as the disregard for its life, I mean, when two of your subordinates are telling you, get off his neck, get off his neck, get off his neck, quit putting your knee on his neck, like, and then you say,
And that's
no,
fair.
what do you know? You're a rookie, you know?
And that's fair. But again, what do you have to say about
Like, how is that not disregard?
how? But he is saying I can't breathe the entire time.
He may have actually been struggling to breathe, but he was standing up at one point, right? Handcuffed, and he was saying, I can't breathe. I mean, no one's touching him. He's literally just, like, leaning against a cop car at this point, and he's saying, I can't breathe. I mean,
He's
like...
sitting in the back seat of the cop car saying I can't breathe.
Well, I mean, it's sort of like if a drunk dude is saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. Like, it doesn't mean you get to knee on his neck until he suffocates to death. You know? Like...
No, I for sure think they should have just left him in the car. And because honestly, so the whole reason they took him out of the car and put him on the ground was because he was uncomfortable in the car. When I'm arresting you, I could give two fucks about your comfort.
Yeah.
Like, we'll deal with this at the precinct.
Yeah, you want to file a charge on me because I left you in the car that had the air conditioning running? Like, okay, well, I'll deal with that. As opposed to what Chauvin's going through now. I'm sure he would totally take that trade.
Mm-hmm.
I just...
So, I mean, I see that as a clear disregard for life. Like this, like they're telling him, get off his neck, do that, and then they're like, he's like, no. like what?
I mean, I can see that argument. I just don't... Again, this hold was legal. This hold was policy. It was totally fine for him to use this hold until George Floyd died and they changed it.
Right. Well, I mean, I know several cops who are like, we don't change. Like the dude who trains, like, so Chauvin's been a cop for a while. He hasn't went through training in a while, like new training. That's why his subordinates told him, get off his neck, because that's not a part of what they actually train you to do.
The new recruits.
The use of force instructor was like, this is not how I train MPD guys. And that's why the cop fired him. The chief of police.
Yeah.
They were like, we do not train this. This predates me if this is what he was trained to do. And to be technical, it was in the manual. The dude who wrote the manual testified and said, no, it's in there. You know? Like, I put it there. Which doesn't make it okay to me. But, I mean, like...
well, and you brought up the point, like, so there are, 18,000 precincts in America?
Mm-hmm.
And they all have different rule books?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so, there are things that we can be doing to rectify some of this. But I still, like I said, of course, like, if you were... so, assume Chauvin's been trained, last time he went through training,
Mm-hmm.
that this hold is acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Then why, me as a 15-year veteran on the police force, why am I going to listen to the rookie who's like, no, that's not okay, that's not okay? And it's like, dude, I was trained. I was trained too. I've been doing this longer than you. I don't know where you're getting this peppy spit fuck attitude,
Mm-hmm.
but I've done this before. I mean, the same hold has been used probably hundreds, if not thousands of times by Minneapolis Police Department.
Right. And I agree with that, but that doesn't, at the same time, it doesn't make
it okay.
Right.
But no one died.
Right. But if they did die, you got to be punished.
But, so, if this has been used thousands of, or hundreds of times, let's just say hundreds of times, by other police officers. As a matter of fact, there's testimony to this.
Mm-hmm.
Said that they used the same hold for similar amounts of time, and they didn't die.
Mm-hmm.
Then you would assume there were other factors that caused the death.
Why would you assume that?
Because it's been done hundreds of other times.
Just because the death rate is low doesn't mean
The death
anything.
rate would be 1, as far as we know.
Right. Well,
Over
as far-
hundreds
as
of
far
arrests.
as we know.
As far as we know. Would be 1 over hundreds of arrests.
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't you assume that, again, given that he had 3 times the lethal dose of a drug in his system, combined with methamphetamine...
Well, so here's the thing. You keep wrapping back to the fentanyl. So he had 11, I don't know what the term is. It's like nanograms per milliliter or something. It's a lethal dose. A lethal dose is what? 4 or 5?
All I know, the running saying right now is he had enough fentanyl in his system to kill a horse.
Well, I know who's making that argument, and I can tell you they're wrong. People have lived up to 17. Right?
Oh, wow.
Okay,
So,
I got a question for you.
thousands of people have lived up to 17.
Why by this point? So 2 beers is over the legal limit
And
for alcohol.
So this
to drive.
analogy is
Yeah,
a
but
bit
this
of a
is a-
stretch.
It's supposed
you gotta
hang on,
kind of go with the thought.
I'm gonna stop you right there because just because you're acclimated to it. So like me, I drink whiskey. Just because I drink whiskey regularly means I don't feel the effects. I don't get drunk. Like so during the course of this podcast, I've had 4 shots,
Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
so I feel fine. Okay,
But-
now
But if you get in a car crash and die,
I
is
could
it
still
the
be over
alcohol?
the
Is
legal
the
limit.
alcohol that killed you, or is the fact that you were going 65 on a highway and you went off a bridge?
I
by
mean, I could
mistake?
for sure say it's the alcohol because
If you had just had 2 beers,
State's
in you,
going to say it's
you-
the alcohol.
State's gonna say it's the alcohol.
But
It's definitely not because that bridge was
alcohol was the only factor in that scenario.
there. That's true.
So, but I think in this one,
Okay,
there's
so what
enough
about
factors.
if I get in a car crash and my seatbelt fails when I'm drunk?
Well, I would say your drunk driving may have probably caused the accident, right? But is that what
But the
kills you?
seatbelt
Probably
failure.
not
But-
having
but-
the seatbelt.
so
Probably
two-
what
so-
No,
kills
a
you.
seatbelt failure.
Well, then it would probably be on the seatbelt, I would think.
You would think it would be on the
So-
seatbelt.
so 2
So
beers-
it's not the fact that I was driving drunk off my ass and got into a wreck. It's the fact that the seatbelt failed when I got into a wreck.
So if you have 2 beers, would you consider yourself drunk?
I've had 4 shots that I wouldn't consider myself drunk.
So 4 shots in, and you go driving, and then you crash, and you hit it straight onto a pole.
Legally, you're drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Legally,
So-
that's enough to kill you.
But that's the thing.
Like,
So that's the thing. I'm acclimated to it to the point where I don't feel the effects of the alcohol, but that has
Right.
no bearing on overdose. That's why overdoses are a problem.
right.
Because you can build up
So-
an immunity to the effects of heroin
But if
cocaine.
if you have too much, your body rejects it. His body did not reject the
Right, his
fentanyl,
body-
meaning he was
Fentanyl's
dead.
not the same as cocaine
So-
or heroin.
so-
But your body still tries to reject it by vomiting.
So
That's
from-
how everything works. Alcohol, any hard narcotic.
So, from all the evidence we have about his autopsy, he takes drugs like a champion. You know, like this is a dude who just, I mean, it seemed to have almost no effect on him other than it got him really high at the time. And like I said, people have lived up to 17. Like, that was just in the state of Minnesota. People have lived up to 20-something, right? But past 3 can kill you. Right? 3, 4, 5. I don't remember what the number was. But he had a lot more than the lethal amount. But
he also had a 75% arterial blockage.
I did not hear that. I had no idea.
75% clogged artery.
I don't know what could cause that. I mean,
A bad diet. Like,
No. Well, I mean,
cholesterol's really high.
so this is more of like so is this the
He had
heart argument?
he has
Okay.
pre-existing health concerns.
So basically,
And I
the
will say
police-
too,
go ahead.
a month prior to the arrest, he had overdosed.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. But
Didn't vomit.
he
That's from his girlfriend, Mama.
oh yeah, the girl who testified. I know who you're talking
Yeah.
about. The girl with the red hair, purple hair. Yeah. And but I mean, like the fentanyl, I really don't think it was a case. And the reason I say that, so that was the defense's case. He didn't argue so much on the fentanyl. He was arguing more of like Chauvin did what was reasonable for a police officer to do.
Yeah.
And he didn't argue on the fentanyl because he knew finding a doctor to argue for the fentanyl, I mean, he had to go to Maryland, right, to get somebody to do this. And he knew there wasn't any doctors home that were going to back him up. And
Well, and I want to just say, hang on, real quick, is just because you have trouble finding a doctor that's saying
right,
doesn't mean that that's not the right opinion.
right.
So, like, even in Oklahoma, I probably, well, maybe not here. So in California, I'll have trouble finding a doctor that doesn't want to prescribe my 4-year-old who thinks he's a boy and doesn't want to put him on hormone blockers.
Right. So the difference is that, like, I'm arguing about statements of facts, right? Like, to me, these are not opinion things. Like, if a doctor tells you, like, okay, like 2 + 2 is 4, it's like, okay, well, we can verify that, and it turns out that that's true. Like, that's the same with the fentanyl and stuff. He's like, okay, yes, he acknowledged the fentanyl in the system. He's the guy who found it, right? There was nothing about the fentanyl playing a part in his death, nothing about that. Now, a doctor did later testify that if he'd have found him dead alone in the room, he said, well, would you have assumed it was an overdose? And he's like, well, yeah, but that's not the scenario.
There were
happened.
exacerbating circumstances. Like,
Right.
you can't just... So, obviously, with that level of drugs, you would assume he would have died.
You're playing devil's advocate at that point.
Right.
Well, it's not... Well,
It's
I guess it
all-
would be devil's advocate, but...
You're playing an if statement, like, oh, if you found him, like we just said, we found him
Well,
in
like,
a room.
yeah, if I find a, healthy young 22-year-old dead in their house with no external wounds, like...
Exactly, right?
And then I find three times the lethal dose, I'm like, okay, it's going to be a fucking... But if I find out that same healthy 22-year-old was pinned under a 140...
And I thought the doctor was honest. I thought the doctor was honest whenever he said, well, yeah, I would assume it was an overdose. I mean, like, that's reasonable to me. But
it's situational.
it's not the situation that occurred in Floyd's case.
You can't... Yeah, it's not exactly...
Which, so here's another one. So I'm going to switch around a little bit. So I want to be clear. You have a Fifth Amendment right to not incriminate yourself and to not testify.
Absolutely.
And they can't say, well, because you didn't testify, that must be because you're guilty. No, that is not how that works.
They have to assume you're under the presumption
should it
of...
work that
Yeah,
way.
you're under the presumption of innocence.
The only time that doesn't apply is if you're subpoenaed. You have to testify if subpoenaed.
No, even if subpoenaed, you can plead the Fifth.
I think you can, but they can get you for obstruction if they find something. So, like, if you hide something and they found out that you knew and you didn't help them, they will add obstruction of justice onto whatever your charge is.
But you still have the right to
you
plead
still
the
have
Fifth.
the right
Okay.
to not incriminate yourself. But, so having said that, I did think it was interesting that he didn't testify. I mean, I expected it.
Chauvin or the drug dealer?
Chauvin.
Yeah, I honestly think it would have probably, and honestly a lot of the people that I've heard from think it would have helped to hear Chauvin testify.
Really?
Yeah.
So here's the thing about, like, witness testimony. So, like, if you call forth a witness, the other side gets a chance to cross-examine.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he was afraid of.
Yeah.
And,
Was the prosecution beating him over the head?
Yeah.
But see, so the defense calls a witness, prosecution gets rebuttal, and then defense again gets redirect.
right.
So I still think it's a net gain for the defense because and the opinion that I've heard is that you're humanizing Chauvin. Most people what they understand about Chauvin is he's just a cop. So he's really just a badge. And for a lot of people he's just a symbol of that badge.
Well, it's really easy to convict someone if you dehumanize them. That's what we did in the 60s. This is what we done with Mexican immigrant workers when they come. We dehumanize them. That way it's a lot easier to be like, I'll just convict him.
Absolutely. And I think it would have gone a long way to actually call him as a defense witness.
Interesting thing. So that's why in court now, they're not supposed to, on federal crimes, bring you in an orange jumpsuit. Because it's dehumanizing.
It's why we're not allowed to wear stripes no more.
They'll give you a shirt, tie, pants.
Good.
Yeah.
So it's the way you...
I
mean, and this all goes... I think... Whether or not you agree with the verdict, I think this is at least an agreement with the justice system working.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So
absolutely.
so
what do we all have to say about all the outrage about how this isn't an answer? Like, this isn't...
What do you mean?
Well, so AOC says this isn't justice.
Oh, she said this is accountability, not justice. She said justice would have been Floyd getting a trial and not losing his life.
Oh, that would have been fair.
Right, and I think that is a fair argument, but I don't know necessarily that that's the picture she's trying to paint. I think we're being generous to her right now.
Well,
So,
I'm not going to be generous to AOC because I fucking hate AOC.
Me neither.
In my opinion, no matter if you're guilty or not guilty, you're failing somebody in just as you think about it. So if you say Derek Chauvin is not guilty of all 3 accounts, you failed George Floyd's family. But if, say, you convict him like they did of guilty, did you fail Chauvin's justice? So you're failing somebody in the end.
I think so. So for sure, George Floyd got robbed of his chance at justice.
Yes.
I would have preferred to see him go through the criminal system and get,
As would I.
I think that's a reasonable statement for most people. And I also think that Chauvin may have gotten cheated. Now, I cannot say that for certain. I can say that if I was on that jury, there is a lot of pressure to violate your principles. And I find it very admirable, Wyatt, that you think that you would never violate your principles under any circumstances. I really do. But I have a wife and a daughter, and if you dox me, you're not just burning my house down with me in it.
It's very honorable until there's a gun to your head, or your wife's head, or
like
your daughter's head.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine. And, it takes a very special kind of person, I'm going to refer to our Founding Fathers podcast, but to actually take that gun to your head and say, no, fuck you. And not many people are capable of that. It's not. Even military members, even CIA members, you can't there's a reason they gave Soviet spies cyanide pills because they knew their will would break.
There's the famous thing is so they put the cyanide in the pen cap, and they caught him, and so he said, all right, I'll write my confession if you give me my pen, and all he did was chew the cap. Yeah. And they said one of the Soviets members he was dead before he hit the ground.
Yeah.
So it's you knew the risk you were taking, and you can say it's very honorable.
Like I said, I'm not gonna.
But until you're put into those shoes, you don't know. You
can't know for certain. But what we can know for certain is that the justice system, so far to this point, has progressed exactly how the justice system should. A verdict has been rendered by 12 jurors. A sentence will be dealt down by a judge, and there will be an appeals process. Now, you can have, I have my suspicions about intimidation, but I am not going to call these jurors out. I'm not going to tell you were intimidated, and you say, no, I'm not. Because that's not right. Mm-hmm. This system played out for everyone except George Floyd. Again, I would have rather seen George Floyd arrested and sentenced for his crimes for a 10th stint in prison than see him dead.
Yeah.
But...
That's not how the chips lied.
Right, that's not how the chips fell for him that day, and that's unfortunate. And
is it a tragedy? Yes.
So far, we have absolutely zero evidence to say that Chauvin's rights were violated.
Yeah. No, I agree.
As fair as you can get.
And if that's the case, and I can have my suspicions on it as much as I want, but the fact is the justice system worked, and it's the best justice system in the world. And if you can't trust that, you can't trust anything.
Okay, so what would you say to the Ben Shapiro types who tell you that this was completely rigged from the start?
Well, that's just a cynical point of view. To be perfectly honest, I came into this. If you can watch our previous podcast, I came into this with, look, we got to just trust what the courts say, and that's just going to be. So the courts are just the fucking pinnacle of law and order in this country. And if you can't trust the courts, you can't trust anybody. And I'm not willing to throw that out just yet.
I'm not gonna call anyone on that jury or that judge immoral for their decision.
Absolutely not. Now I can question whether or not I think your decision was what I would have done personally. But again, I am not you.
I'm not in your shoes.
I don't have the level of education you do in law and order. I don't have all the evidence in the case of the jury. Mm-hmm. So if you've made a differing decision, I may not agree with it. But you know what? That's your decision, and you had you have the utmost qualifications for making that decision.
For all we know, if we were on that jury, we may change our opinion on something.
Yeah, correct. There may have been a bit of evidence that I didn't get to see that could have totally changed my point of view.
Mm-hmm. So we weren't there. My thing is, I wasn't there. I don't know what happened when they were deciding the verdict. So I really don't have a say. I think they voted on their conscience. I hope to God they did. if they're intimidated, I hope to God they come forward.
Yeah, because as guilty as I think Chauvin is, I still think like he deserved a trial, a fair trial.
Right.
And I mean, I think the standard was met, but you know, some people don't think so. A weird thing. This trial had some of the stupidest reactions I've ever seen him ever, like in politics.
Yeah.
So like Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters. I didn't
AOC.
really care for AOC. Ben Shapiro gave some stupid takes.
Yeah.
But-
The dumbest one has got to be the Greg Gutfield take. Like I know what you were saying about Nancy Pelosi, but like,
can we be honest? Both sides did a shit show on both Democrats and Republicans made a shit show of themselves on this whole trial.
yeah,
Both sides.
Republicans definitely. So Greg Sheffield, and I'm gonna get in because I'm gonna rant on this son of a bitch. So this dude comes on Fox fucking News, right? And I'm assuming he's a Republican because he's on Fox News. So he comes off and he's like, I'm glad Chauvin got convicted, whether he's innocent or guilty. And just full stop right there makes me want to beat him in the head with a brick.
right.
You
So
know-
somebody, literally a woman on the 5. It was on the 5, and
Was
literally
like, whoa.
they said, "Oh no." You can hear him say it in the clip.
Yeah.
It's like, "Oh no." I'll leave a link in the description of the actual clip, but it's disgusting. But Garrett, go ahead.
It's fucking disgraceful.
Mm.
So, and this is one thing. Like, if you wanted Chauvin convicted, you know, if you wanted him convicted because you saw the evidence, you are an informed person, and you said, you know what, I think he deserves what he got. So, like you've seen about 70% of the trial. You've seen the testimony. So, or 1 to 10, you said 6 or 7. Okay.
Right.
So, and you said, you know what, I think he deserved what he got. That's one thing. But to sit here and say, no, Nick, you may be guilty, you may be innocent, but I want you convicted anyway, because if you're not convicted, my neighbor's going to burn my house down. Fuck you.
Yeah,
Fuck you if that's your
You don't
opinion.
get to say that.
Yeah.
No, you don't get to say that. You don't get to
and-
feel that.
And to
And
be
personally.
to be fair, everyone basically beat him the hell over the
And
head
he-
with that.
Rightfully
Yeah,
so.
and
Rightfully so.
Absolutely. This is fucking disgraceful. This is America. We do not convict people based on a mob mentality.
That was the girl's point. Well, because his argument was like, well, my neighborhood was looted. I don't want to go through that again, and I don't blame other Americans for
Then
not
I
wanting
recommend you get a goddamn firearm.
And I was like, well, that's a piss poor excuse for wanting that. And
Yeah.
the lady was like, we don't sacrifice individuals for like our own greater good, right? And she
Right.
said, no, we do not do that. That is not a thing. We don't make him, because at that point you're saying like, well, I would have sacrificed you, right?
I would have
Whether or
thrown you
not
on
you
the
were
sword.
whether or not you were innocent or guilty, I would have sacrificed you.
I would
It's
have
like,
thrown,
well,
I would have thrown
that's-
you on the sword for peace.
That's fucked.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, you don't-
super fucked. I 110% agree with it, and it's just disgraceful,
Now,
in my opinion.
Maxine Waters was also just awful. Just awful. I think Greg Gutfield, that one takes the cake. But
That one.
Yeah.
So from my point of view, Greg Gutfield, like, no, to outright,
He
to
made
just
the-
say
he made the biggest
on
ass.
on national television, innocent or guilty. I'm glad he was convicted. Are you fucking shitting me?
Biggest ass goes
You,
to him.
yeah, biggest ass. Well, okay. Maxine Waters also has a track record. I don't know about Greg Gutfield, but Maxine Waters has an Al Sharpton level
Yeah.
bullshit record.
Right.
Biggest jackass, I'm going to him so far.
yeah, so I mean, I would have to give him the trophy, right? But that doesn't mean so. Like I bring him up not to paint Republicans because Democrats said some dumb stuff
shit.
during this trial,
So we've gone over Nancy Pelosi sanctifying him.
and Maxine Waters already.
Yeah.
AOC, we didn't really cover hers that much, but basically she was saying that like we got a personal win, but the system is still flawed.
And that seems to be the running theory with the Democrats.
Right.
Is, so like, okay, yeah, it worked out this time, but it's not, the war's not over. And it's like, oh, shut the fuck up.
Right.
Like, look, the judicial system in America, we can have, it may have its issues that we will discuss at a later date, but we are for sure not racist.
Not in today's time.
The court system, I
No.
just don't, I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I mean, if you think that this court was going to find him innocent strictly because it was a white man killing a black man,
No,
you're fucking wrong. And I
No.
think
Yeah, I agree.
like I entirely at that point I don't know that there's a common ground that we can have.
Yeah.
Like And it's infuriating. Now, on the bright side, at least some Democrats reportedly are on board with censoring.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So like so they beat her over the head with it about as
Maxine
much.
Waters.
Yeah, Maxine Waters beat her over the head with it about as much as Republicans. Because like even like some bigger name people were like, that's not the Republican position. Greg Gutfield. But like all the pundits were like, Maxine Waters, this is like the trial. They weren't even sequestered yet. And it was like, so like, let's say you're fucking up and your wife is watching TV, like, and then you see Maxine Waters. It's like, well, okay, like that's something.
So not only are these BLM rioters threatening me, but they've got government support.
Right. So now for the last person who talked about it, and it's not so much that he talked about it, it's that he didn't talk about it. And what I really appreciated was Biden didn't say anything till they were sequestered. And I really did appreciate that.
You know, and I disagree with what he said. So the premise of my disagreement is, I hope that they reach the right verdict.
He said, "I pray." Even
I pray they reach the right verdict. Now my problem with that is he's obviously praying for a conviction on all 3 counts. I just don't agree with that.
How could you say that?
Because he's a virtue signaler of.
But I'm gonna ask if all he says is I am praying for the right verdict.
You know how many times I get beat over the head on this podcast whenever I try and say stuff like that, and you guys are like, "Well, you can't claim to know what's in somebody's head." Do you have any idea how many times
I would
I've
actually like to know.
We do. I will admit we
you
probably
know what?
beat
I can't. You know, that's fair. I can't claim to know what was in Biden's head when he said the right
I think
verdict.
you can. We know what he meant. I'm just saying, like, it's funny because I get beat over that, like the entire impeachment podcast. I got beat over the head with that, and I was like, well, we can make pretty clear, like, assumptions.
I'm not going to claim to know what Joe Biden meant by I pray for the right verdict. I don't know. I'm not going to beat him over the head saying, you were wanting a guilty verdict, because all he said was
How about this? Can we all just agree that the other 2 branches should have stayed the fuck out of it?
Yes.
Well, I don't think they had any influence in it, but yes.
Well, so whether or not they should have just not going to talk about it. So the press secretary and Biden's whole administration should have been like, nope, not my job. Literally the job of the 3rd branch of government.
I would have been happy.
I
would have been happy. They say we'll make a comment when the verdict is read.
And now I will say to Biden's credit, he was ready to mobilize the National Guard. And damn it,
smart.
It was good when Trump did it, and it was good when Biden was ready to do it.
Right.
Okay. And that was one of the things I was trying to say was that they had already mobilized the National Guard in Minneapolis, and BLM had come by and shot up a bunch of them that were guarding the courthouse. Like, good on Biden.
Wait, like they shot National Guard members?
Yes.
Like this is verified. Like you can go look this up. Okay,
yes, one was wounded.
I'll try and leave a link to that down in the description.
They shot at National Guard members, and at least one was wounded.
Sheesh.
And that's not intimidating. Imagine you're in that courthouse and hear gunshots outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not intimidation.
I personally don't think
They didn't say they were intimidated. I mean, it's Minneapolis. There could be gunshots all the time.
Who knows? I mean,
it's like Chicago. Oh, hang on, someone's throwing
fireworks. Yeah, they got a guy suspected of shooting at him.
Yeah, good. And you know charges. What? Any single person, if you go on national TV and you're saying like we're gonna riot or we're gonna get violent if something doesn't go our way, you ought to be fucking arrested for intimidation, for obstruction of justice.
2 National Guard members injured.
Yeah.
In the shooting.
Oh my goodness.
And no offense, that's probably the best grounds they have for a mistrial.
Do you know that
if there's a shooting outside the courthouse?
I mean,
no. In my own opinion, that is going to be the only option for a mistrial.
Well, no, Maxine Waters. But anyway,
back to Biden.
Yeah.
I want to go back to him. So what were you saying? You didn't appreciate that he was kind of ambiguous about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll give you, like, I can't know what was in the dude's heart. Maybe he's like, oh, man, I really hope they just find him guilty of manslaughter. But I don't feel like that's what it is. But I don't know. And I find it distasteful that the executive branch is ruling in on what the correct...
Now, I feel like if he would have said, I pray for the right verdict, guilty or not guilty, would have helped him.
Absolutely.
If he would have put just guilty or not guilty... that would have probably helped him.
How
a
would
bunch.
you like it if Bill Clinton would have said in 1996, whenever they were convicting Timothy McVeigh, like, I'm praying for the right verdict, guilty or not guilty, as an Oklahoman? How would you feel?
Well, considering I wasn't alive at the time, I feel like that's
You were alive then. It was 1995.
Holy shit.
Yep.
Wow, so I was 3 years old.
You wouldn't. Yeah, you wouldn't remember.
But anyway, like, how would you have felt back then, right? Like, you'd have been like,
I'd have felt like it was the executive branch. Well, I was a 3-year-old, so I'd have thought,
Google
who'd
Gaga.
who'd
No,
fuck
no,
the
no,
old
no.
man on TV? But I get what you're saying. I understand, but guilty or not guilty, you are the
No.
executive head
No
of a
offense,
branch of
but
government.
I'm not gonna compare George Floyd to Timothy McVeigh. McVeigh was a much worse person.
I'm not going to compare Chauvin to
Yeah,
Timothy
I'm not going
McVeigh.
to compare. That guy
Right,
bombed
no,
a
that's
daycare center.
So I made a clear analogy so you could
Yeah,
get my point.
yeah,
My point
I
was
get
like,
it.
so like to them, this Chauvin is clearly guilty, and to me, he's clearly guilty, right? So anything but a guilty verdict, it would be like, what happened? What did you see that I didn't see?
But is it your right, or is it your obligation to go on and say, so in the case of Maxine Waters, and I know you're talking about Biden right now, but in the case of Maxine Waters, it's like, I saw the same footage you saw, but if you have a difference of opinion, I'm going to burn down your city. Whereas Biden is like, I saw what I saw, and I know what I think is right.
I'm just praying for the right.
And it wasn't even like, hey, you may disagree with me and I'm not going to like it. But it was...
Well, if you're asking me which one I prefer, it's for sure the Biden approach.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
Like, he shut up.
As much as people don't, I think he played it right. Now, again, if he would have just put guilty or not guilty, that would have helped him.
That's a good point. So at the same time he was saying that, he had already mobilized the National Guard.
So he said...
He was preparing for the worst, but hoping for the best.
His whole quote is, I'm just praying for the right verdict.
Mm-hmm.
That's all he said. I mean, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No.
I mean, we all pretty well knew what he meant. And for one, the jury was sequestered. The jury was and he says that immediately
And when we say
after.
so, sequester is going to get thrown around. So like they were supposed to be quote sequestered the entire trial, whereas they're not watching media, they're not checking the news, they're not looking at stuff on the case. When he says sequestered now, he means full sequestered.
In a hotel room, no TV, no phones, no Wi-Fi, nothing.
They were
Right.
back to caveman style.
As they should
sitting.
have been the entire
Right. Yes.
trial. But
So they literally could not have heard Biden say that. So Biden could not have influenced them.
I mean, yes, barring somebody calling them and say, "Hey, Biden just said this," which you can't control,
right?
Because this is America, not communist Russia or China. Like,
and I think that was the best way for Biden to handle.
To his credit,
He
like,
played it
the
right.
The best way for him to say, the best way was for him to just not say anything. Like, we will approach this question
When the verdict is done.
when the verdict is rendered.
So the problem is, everyone was asking him and Jen Psaki, "Hey, what are your thoughts on that?"
Jen
Like,
Psaki has
everybody.
no problems
Everybody.
being like, "Okay, we'll talk about that later."
Well,
So don't bring that
she,
to me.
She moved it on, right? She basically said, "Well, we'll go over that later. We'll go over that later. We'll go over that later."
All she would have to say is, we'll address this when the verdict is done and read.
Yeah.
When the verdict is reached,
Well,
we
if there
will
was-
answer
if
all
there's
your
a
questions.
simple.
If they're sequestered, I don't see a problem with weighing in.
You could have waited the whole 2 days.
Well, we didn't know that at the time.
Yeah, but
What
you
if
could
they-
have
what if-
waited. And,
What if they
like
say
you're
a
saying,
statement and they end up being wrong?
They end up being a jackass, and then you have to defend it.
Yeah. What if they think the
I'm just,
Biden administration thinks he's guilty, and then he's not guilty? He's like, well, what the hell?
so my argument is, I think he handled it.
So-
it,
The best
it
he
left a
could've.
bad taste in my mouth, but I think it's wrong to say this is the best way he could have handled it, because the best way he could have handled it would have been just like, we'll talk about it when it's done.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, it's not like this administration has not done that before. The whole immigration crisis,
they've
they're like,
moved-
we'll handle that later.
I'm telling you that they did move the can, right? They said, during the trial, they were like, no questions. No questions about the trial.
They waited for the jury to
and
go
that's, so
into
it's
committee.
not it's good, but it's not the best that it could have been, in my opinion.
Was
And
the
again,
jury in committee trying to find a verdict at the time?
when he
Yeah.
said that, yes,
Then-
they were
then-
full on sequestered.
Then I don't have a problem with that. If
I
the
don't-
jury
I
is
don't
trying to
necess-
reach a verdict,
I don't necessarily have. And so again, I find his actual statement distasteful, but I don't think it influenced the jury.
No.
Because the jury should not and could not, under principle, have heard his statement.
Mhm.
Now, I still think it would have been best for him to just defer the question until a verdict was rendered.
But and again, I'll say, I know you hit me up with like, what would it take for Biden to get an attaboy for fucking mobilizing the National Guard? You know, yeah.
Again,
I have a problem with the way media treated Trump when he mobilized the National Guard in these cities for the BLM riots, but I did not have a problem with Trump's actions, and I do not have a problem with him mobilizing the National Guard, because you as an innocent citizen of Minneapolis have a right to be protected by your government, to whom which you pay taxes, from violent outbursts of a mob.
Mm-hmm.
Hands down. And I think that is the most commendable thing probably so far in the Biden administration.
Really?
Is that you mobilized the National Guard. And you were ready to deal with these violent protesters. And I don't think it's a stretch to assume that BLM was going to get violent if they didn't get the verdict.
No, they were already rioting at that point.
They were already rioting, and
well, the riot turned into a so people. It's the same thing during the election. They were grouping up to riot, right, in case Trump had won, and which to me is fucked up. You shouldn't riot because your guy lost an election. Period.
Yeah, period.
But so once Biden had won, the group that was gonna riot turned it into a party. And I mean a totally innocent party. Like, they were just a bunch of people getting messed up in the street.
Oh, and that's the same thing they did with the George Floyd riot.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, the same thing happened here. Like, the same people who were rioting, they just turned it into a 1.5 million people party across the country.
And it's bullshit.
Think so?
Well, I mean, you could turn it into a party if you want. But I'm saying the threat of violence, if you don't get your way, is bullshit.
Yeah, you don't get to play like, we're here if we don't get our way, but when we get our way, we're going to party.
You don't get to go to a protest with a soup can and say, no, this is for my family.
And then,
And then throw it at a cop. Oh, God. Wrapping up thoughts about the George Floyd trial.
I think it was fair. I think he's the best you're going to get.
Okay, so fair and right verdict, or what? Like, what do you think, Nick?
He got a fair trial, in my opinion. Until evidence comes up saying he didn't, he got a fair trial. I agree with the verdict.
Okay. All right.
What?
Same. Fair trial. Perfect verdict. I didn't think he was going to get third degree, but I thought he was guilty of it.
I'm going to have to go with, until somebody comes forward and an appeals court rules, you got a fair trial, and I'm going to trust the jurors. Like, I know I have my suspicions about this whole case, but I'm gonna say fair trial, right verdict. I didn't particularly have a dog in this fight. If evidence comes out later that Chauvin shouldn't have been convicted or something else happened, then I'm gonna be really upset. But until there is evidence, until there is proof that would overturn this case, I can't. You gotta trust them.
The good thing about our justice system is, if you're convicted innocent, you can't be trialed again. But if you're guilty, you can. You can keep going until you're innocent.
Yeah.
Now, and that's a small consolation to Chauvin if it is later.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean,
you can always prove your innocence, but you can never prove your guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you could definitely
not when you're convicted innocent. Like O.J. Simpson, after he was found not guilty, he could have said, "Yeah, I murdered those two people." You can't do nothing.
That's gonna be my stance. Is don't be a cynic. Okay, right, left, middle. Don't be cynical about this.
Respect the decision that they made.
Don't come into this with like, well, the jury was obviously intimidated, because they weren't obviously intimidated. Now there was plenty of attempts to intimidate them, but until someone says so, you don't know. Okay.
Yep.
There was plenty of motivation for them to not vote innocent.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't if just like with the election, either bring me the evidence or shut the fuck up. And I'm going to trust our judicial system to work.
Right. That's the default position.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So last one, and then we'll wrap, and then we're done. What are the chances of a mistrial, you think? Like, if you had to put it on a scale of 100.
Oh.
Instead of just a yes, no.
Until you show me evidence, 0%.
So you're saying 0?
0%.
Well, I'm saying if you had to pay if
you're the appeals court.
If I'm the appeals court and no evidence of any jury comes out, 0%.
Okay, so Nick, you're switching the question. You're answering a question that nobody asked right now. So I'm asking you, if like right now, if you had to gamble, gun to your head, what percent, right, would you guess this is a mistrial?
Again, I think 0%.
Zero?
Until evidence is shown, it's 0%.
So even the evidence of Maxine Waters and other political statements and the presence of BLM doesn't alter that.
I mean, that's opportunity, but I'm not necessarily sure that that's...
I mean, if you're gonna throw that in, maybe 15% is the most I'll give you.
I'm pretty low, too. I'm at about 10.
Yeah, I've got a 50-50.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Got a 50-50. I really think this warranted a mistrial, honestly, further on in the case. When you start allowing all that eyewitness emotional testimony, I have an issue with it.
Well, I feel like that's common in most cases. It's just not... I don't think...
4 days long.
It's just not as... Well, in OJ's case, the character witnesses went on for forever. Right? Like, I mean, like, it's not incredibly uncommon. The trial was also really short, I thought.
Yeah, the trial was really short. But they had to. Once they started the trial, it had to be...
Yeah.
Okay. And I do think there could have been better. Like I said, I think he should have extradited him to another state, and I think he should have sequestered the jury.
I'm gonna make you go at least 51-49, just so that way it's now 50-50. Like
no 50-50. I got 51%. He stays convicted.
Okay. All right. That's okay.
For a couple of reasons. I don't know that an appeals court is going to want to overturn a case like this.
Mm.
After a verdict's been rendered, I don't think they're going to look at it. I don't know that there's enough to... again, especially without a juror coming forward, I don't think an appeals court's going to be like, yep, you were definitely... I don't think they're going to look at you and be like, you were definitely intimidated.
Yeah.
Now, just because you had the opportunity to be intimidated, that doesn't mean you were.
Yep.
So, I'm going to give it 51-49.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
We're at an hour 46. I really wanted to talk about the Columbus, Ohio one, but I guess we'll do that in another podcast.
Yeah, we can work that in some other time.
She deserved to be shot.
Yeah,
basically,
just
LeBron James made a huge mistake.
Consensus of the podcast: justified shooting. Cop's a hero.
Yeah.
Saved a life.
Yeah, saved a life, and unfortunately had to take another one. But you know what? Don't stab other bitches. Like, sorry.
Yeah, like go watch I'll leave the link in the description of the body cam footage. Literally, it goes frame by frame. She was mid-stab, like in the process of trying to stab this girl, and
yeah, and if you're gonna. You know what?
Girl just backed up against a car, has nowhere to go, about to get stabbed. I would want you to shoot that person. I don't want a warning shot or a taser. I want that person dead.
Yeah, and there's a running meme right now that, like, just for the record, if someone's trying to stab me, I would appreciate it if you shot them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah. Anyone who's calling this cop like a racist, you can get fucked.
Yeah. So like LeBron James.
He saved a black life by unfortunately having to ending another.
And in the good news, so like I've seen, so the media hasn't covered this like how I would cover it. Like I would cover it like, of course it's a justified shooting. But the pundits that I listen to on both sides are like, okay, clearly, like if you're on the left and you think that this wasn't justified, it's just because you hate cops.
What's Don Lemons?
I have no idea. I really don't. I don't want to lose brain cells. I don't have them. I don't have enough to lose.
That's the same reason I don't watch Laura Ingraham. I'm be perfectly honest with you.
I can only watch so much.
Just end the story. Oh, one more. I do want to rectify this. So Toledo in Chicago.
Yeah. Oh, clarify.
Yeah. I want to clarify. So on our last podcast, we did cover like we didn't know if he had the gun. We didn't know if it was he's a 13-year-old kid shot by cops. It was really unfortunate. Come to find out, definitely did have the gun.
And it was his gun.
Yeah, it was his gun. Was definitely shooting at passing cars, which is the whole reason the police called. The police witnessed him shooting at passing cars. Like, this is...
Yeah.
So...
You can actually see the gun in his hand in, like, the body cam.
Yeah, so now that body cam footage... So, Toledo, good shoot. Girl in Columbus, Ohio, good shoot. And Dwight. Dwight's still an unfortunate accident.
Dante
Wright.
Oh, that's why I got
I will say, at least that cop's taking responsibility. She resigned from the force. She's taking full accountability for what she did.
I mean,
absolutely.
She's going to try and minimize her sentence, which I don't blame her for, because I really do think it was an accident.
But at least she's taking the responsibility.
But the most they'll get for her is manslaughter.
Yes.
So, like, worst case for her, if they throw the book at her, is 4 years.
Right.
I know they can get her on 30.
Considering record. Anyway. So just, we promised you a George Floyd podcast, but to end it off, I'm going to... So I think we're all in agreement that Toledo was a good shoot?
Yep.
I wouldn't have been mad if the cop didn't shoot. I mean, I understand he had the gun in the hand. He threw it away. It's a split-second decision. vilify the cop.
He's either throwing it away or he's drawing it.
Yeah, it's like if I saw a quick movement of I know he's got a gun in his hand. I don't know what he's doing.
I don't blame the cop for shooting Toledo, and it's unfortunate a 13-year-old
so
man
it's
died.
easy.
But
It's easy to look at the frame by frame because the frame by frame shows him he throws it, and then you see the hands up,
But
right?
if you watch it real time, you don't.
you see the gun and then his hand up, and it's like you either have a gun in that hand
or you don't.
or you don't, and it's either I'm dead or you are.
Right.
And then as far as the Columbus, Ohio, I can't even remember Mika, I think something. Michaela Bryant. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a good shoot. Like, I mean, 100%, any footage that I've seen, like, she's not on, we have audio of her saying, I'm going to stab a bitch. Now, if you listen to the audio, I can't hear anything personally, but I'm also deaf. I worked in oil field for a long time.
That's it.
So,
But everyone who was there
like
testifies that that's what she said before she got
I'm-
shot.
Okay. All right. That's about it, right?
yeah, so BLM don't riot, calm down.
Yeah, you got to win. Just take the dub.
Take the dub, go home.
Take the dub. They won.
And don't be cynical, guys. Don't be cynical, no matter what side
Respect
you're
what
on.
the jury decision.
Absolutely.
Please respect the judge. If
You
it's
gotta respect the courts, and you gotta respect the jury, and no matter what happens.
Yep. All right. Well, that's it. All right. Well, we'll talk to y'all later. This has been the Refined Peasants.
Hey guys, thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit that little notification bell in the corner, and be sure to let us know if you guys have any ideas for what you want to see from us next. We're a new upcoming podcast. Share it with your friends if you're confident.